Good evening, everybody. My name is Katie Erickson. I'm the Director of Education here at the Michael C. Carlos Museum. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd first like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we are currently on the land of the Muscogee Creek people who lived, worked, produced knowledge on, and nurtured the land where both of our campuses are now located. Emory seeks to honor the Muscogee Nation and other Indigenous caretakers of this land by humbly seeking knowledge and histories and committing to the stewardship of the land. Our program this evening, The Italian Job, is part of an ongoing series, Scrutiny, which examines the critical issues facing museums today, including ethical collecting, display, and interpretation. I do want to take this moment to please ask everyone to go ahead and silence your cell phones if you haven't already, just to be respectful of one another and our speakers this evening. Tonight we will hear from Provenance researcher Shanley and curator of Greek and Roman art, Ruth as they recount the process of a recent repatriation to the Republic of Italy and its complexities. Please join me in welcoming Ruth and Annie.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We have very much sort of planned this as a kind of conversation. So we are going to give an overview from our sort of respective positions on this transfer of 5 objects from the Carlos Museum to the Republic of Italy, which was made official on August 29th of last year. And we are going to give some insight into what that process looked like, so how we came to how we came to transfer these objects to Italy, what the process of researching their provenance was, and how we came to collaborate in what was a really kind of rewarding way with the Ministry of Culture from the Republic of Italy. But we do want this to be a conversation with you, so we're going to leave out some time for questions at the end. But before we dive into the greedy details, I actually wanted to start with a little bit of an art history lesson. So we can just skip forward. These are the 5 objects in question. 5 very different objects from very different places, from very different points in time, and of very different types, but all of which have been now transferred to the Republic of Italy. 2 physically have been returned, and 3 remain with us in Atlanta on loan. And we're sort of really happy that we're able to resolve this story in that way, that some of those objects can stay with us so we can continue to learn from them and to think with and about them. But the reason that I wanted to give a little art historical overview is that in many ways, for me at least, one of the sort of driving goals of provenance research is to better understand the objects that are in our care. And that means truly understanding where they have come from. Where they were found, where they were deposited, perhaps therefore where they were used, so that we can really gain a deeper, fuller understanding of what those objects meant in their original context. Because for as long as the objects in our care in any museum are without provenance, then we cannot understand who was using them and where they went and what those objects perhaps meant in that original context. And these objects actually all, as a sort of unplanned assemblage, actually offer a really nice case study in what you can and cannot do with an object when you don't know where it's come from. So I thought I would just give you a little grounding in what they are, so that as we continue with Annie's research, we can sort of understand all the ways in which that has proved to be important. So the 2 objects on the upper right and the upper left, so this Curator here, and then the fishbowl just behind me, are both Italian in terms of their production. So these are objects that were made in southern Italy, and they are representative of a type of object that was really hardly exported at all. So they were made in Italy, they were made for local customers, they were used in Italy, and it's very, very likely that that is where they were buried, deposited, and therefore found. The object on your left is a type of object that would have served a funerary function. So this is what we call a volute crater, and it would have been buried in a tomb as a grave gift. So even though we can identify this as an object that has come from southern Italy, because we don't know anything more about its archaeological context, we can't know anything about the tomb where it was found, we don't know anything about what else was in that tomb, we don't know anything about the identity of the individual who was deposited there also. And so we've lost all kinds of really valuable information about what this object, how this object functioned. We might want to ask questions, for example, about how its decoration related perhaps to the status, gender, or other identity of the deceased individual whose tomb and buried it. And so for as long as it exists as an object that we can only talk about in terms of its decoration and its style, we're missing all kinds of important information about its ancient context. The other three objects, so at the center, in the top row, and then the two on the bottom, are Greek. And they actually come from very different places in the Greek world, and from quite a wide range of, in terms of their chronology. So the object at the top is a fragment from a plate. It is East Greek in manufacture and dates to the 6th century BCE. The cup on the bottom left is from Sparta, and this is an object that is attributed to a known painter, the Rider painter, and is dated to around 570 BCE. And then the cup on the right is Athenian in terms of its production, and dates to around 540 BC. So we've got three objects from very different places, different parts of the Greek world. And these are all objects that actually were quite widely exported across the ancient Mediterranean. So the Spartan cup, for example, cups of this type have been found in the East Greek world, on the island of Rhodes. They've also been found in North Africa, in Cyrene in Libya, as well as in Naucratis in Egypt. And they've been found in Italy, including in southern Italy, in the area around Taranto, in Etruria, and also in Sicily. So again, this is an example of an object that could have come from many different places, and that therefore we might want to think about in many different ways if we knew the context in which it was being used. And so for as long as it also exists as an object without an archaeological context, we've lost all of that information. And we can only think about it in terms of its style, perhaps its attribution, and these kind of broad connoissorial ways. So for me, having the opportunity to research their provenance and to learn more about where these objects have come from and to give them a more precise location and sort of time and place has been incredibly rewarding, because now we can think in a lot more detail about what these objects were, even if we don't know for absolute certain, we can think in more kind of precise terms. So I'm going to hand over to you.
I should have been taking notes.
That's great. Yeah, that's it.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for introducing the objects and introducing the issues that are at play here. Because I think when we talk about provenance, so often I'm coming up here and telling you about this has been returned, this has been repatriated, but it's not just about that. It's about filling in the life stories of the objects. And so that helps on the curatorial front, and then it also helps fill in the modern history of the objects as well. One question I did want us to sort of ponder in front of everyone is, when we were contacted about these 5 objects, were you surprised that anyone was asking for these objects back?
Such a good question.
I'm never surprised. I know.
I think that certainly for the South Italian pieces, I sort of always feel that anything that has a South Italian context but doesn't have a provenance, I'm always a little anxious about that, because we know that so many objects were looted from that region. And actually that kind of applies to these other three objects, the Greek objects, because these are objects that they're representative of objects that have been found in tombs in southern Italy. So they all have a sort of potential connection to a region that we know historically has been extensively looted and has been a kind of source for trafficked antiquities. So, I mean, were you to have come to me and said, pick an object that you think is looted, I might not have picked an antiquity cup.
Right.
So once you start thinking about it, you can kind of say, okay, it makes sense that this is coming from a place that you know, if I was going to put a bet on where something was coming from, it could be this. And actually, there's a cup, a Laconian cup by the same painter in the British Museum that they acquired in the 19th century, but from a Neapolitan dealer. So it's sort of this idea that, you know, these are objects that are coming out of the ground in this region. It sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't hugely surprised.
Nor go with that. Yeah, I picked a couple of these objects to go through as case studies, I think, but with all of these objects, there wasn't one amongst them that I was like, oh, this is solid provenance. What are you talking about? And when we got the request from the Ministry of Culture, we were sort of like, yeah, okay. See what happened there. So, of course, one of the objects we wanted to talk about was our Melanie Bay Curator. She's quite literally been our poster child for the past couple of years. She's on the banners that you see around campus. She's on the banner for Carlos Collections online.
She's on a banner on my door.
Yeah, she's on Ruth's door. She's a pretty iconic piece for the Carlos. We actually acquired her in 1994. There was a collector in Geneva. His name is Pierre Skiflunov. He was selling off parts of his collection in the 90s. A gentleman by the name of Christophe Leon acted as the agent. It's my favorite. And according to Christophe Leon's correspondence with the Carlos at the time, Skiflunov had actually purchased the Melanie Bay Curator from the Swiss art market in the 1960s. But the reason we kind of smirked and looked at each other when I said Christophe Leon's name is going back through the records, sort of, you know, in hindsight, all of the correspondence, Christophe was always too busy to actually meet the representative from the Carlos. He always had someone else stand in for him. It was usually Jacques Chemet, who was a curator at the museum in Geneva. And so I just started developing this story in my head that Christophe Leon wasn't a real person because like no one ever actually met him. So he became sort of like the Dread Pirate Roberts figure or the Kaiser Sose figure in our antiquity trafficking story. But I'm 99% sure now he was a real person, and he was representing Pierre Skiflunov in the mid-90s. And so with the help of Jacques Chemet, who was the one who actually showed representatives from the Carlos the Melanie Bay Curator, we purchased it in 1994 and brought it home to the Carlos.
It's maybe worth, and maybe talk about this, but noting that this was a vase that had been published. Mm-hmm. So at the point that the museum acquired it, it was considered known, it was considered kind of public. There were several publications. But so when you then started looking, actually going to talk about this, when the publications began, it wasn't a long history of its publication. It was published a lot, but only in sort of recent years.
Well, and I think that's important to bring up at this point too, because it was just 1994. This was before we were aware of sort of the extent and the breadth of the antiquities trafficking rings going on. It was certainly before we really knew who these figures were, what their reputations were. And so to us, we had a dealer who was representing this client. He said he'd had it from the 60s. It had been widely published. It was considered a known object. So for the 1990s, this was considered a good purchase, a good acquisition. So there's not much we can criticize in how this was handled by our predecessors. But life happens. And in 2021, we were contacted by the Italian Ministry of Culture. They provided us with these 2 Polaroid photographs. Now, these Polaroids have been circulating on the internet for some time. The problem with that is they were said to have come from a certain source, but we had no proof that that's actually where they came from. And we didn't have any supporting evidence. People were just showing these photographs on the internet. But through the Italians, we were able to confirm that these two Polaroids came from the archive of a convicted antiquities trafficker and Italian dealer named Giacomo Medici. There he is, being quite dashing in front of art that I'm sure is not stolen. Medici was active for over 40 years. He had a really, in terms of a criminal enterprise, a really great system set up. He was good at his job. It's just his job was illegal. He had a network of tombaroli. It's literally tomb robbers, but these were the guys on the ground who were doing these illicit diggings. I hate to call them illicit excavations, right? But these were the guys who were actually digging the objects up out of the ground. And then there was a whole network of middlemen and traffickers that were still trying to untangle and still trying to understand. And then these traffickers would funnel objects through various dealers or auction houses. And then from there, they would be purchased by museums, private collectors. Sometimes they knew what they were purchasing. Sometimes people didn't know what they were purchasing. So that's kind of another issue you have to untangle, is who knew what and when, which is very, very complicated. But the Italians were able to confirm that, yes, those Polaroids came from Giacomo Medici's archive. Here's more. I would like to stress these are not Carlos Museum objects. This is an image I stole from the internet. And so Giacomo Medici, as I said, he was active for over 40 years. He had a really good run. But what happened was there were two main things that led to his exposure. I'm not going to call it a downfall, but to his exposure. In 1991, a former employee of Sotheby's London, his name is James Hodges, was convicted of stealing antiquities and money from his former employer, Sotheby's of London. And while this court case was going on, while the court case was being built, James was systematically stealing documents from Sotheby's London and making copies of them. There have been allegations that he almost tried to hold them ransom against Sotheby's, saying, if you drop the charges, I will not release these documents. Sotheby's didn't back down, and so James Hodges did in fact release the documents. And specifically, he released them to a journalist by the name of Peter Watson. And so this is what gave us the book, The Medici Conspiracy. And it really did sort of blow the lid off of this. It was partially, if not fully, responsible for Sotheby's London's antiquities department being shut down for a number of years. And it became clear from these documents that the individuals working in the antiquities department at Sotheby's London knew they were getting trafficked objects. In some cases, they were seen to be assisting the traffickers. Like, oh, if you go through Switzerland and claim this on the documentation, it's going to be a little bit easier. There was no objectivity. There was no arm's length from some of the employees at Sotheby's. It was very much a cooperative exercise to get these looted antiquities out of their source countries and to the sale rooms at Sotheby's. And with the documents that James Hodges transferred over to Peter Wilson, one name kept coming up over and over again, and it was Giacomo Medici. And so it just became clear, not only were antiquities being trafficked, but one of the main players in the traffic of antiquities was Giacomo Medici. The other instance that was not good for Mr. Medici was the death of a gentleman by the name of Pascal Camera. His sort of street name was the Fat Guy. He was round. Camera in the 1960s was a lieutenant in the Italian customs police. And And that allowed him to begin dabbling in the trafficking of antiquities, legal excavations, transferring these antiquities and profiting from the illegal antiquities trade. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Camera was a regional crime boss who was in charge of the Tomb Baroli. He was in charge of these tomb robbers. And in the summer of 1995, Italian officials were actually investigating him for the theft of 8 Greek vases from a castle. And so they were trailing him. They had a car following him. And Camera had lunch one day, and for some reason his tail didn't immediately follow him. They figured, oh, he's going to his apartment in Rome. It's fine, we'll catch up with him there. This was August 31st, 1995. And wouldn't you know it, Camera had a single car accident and died. It's amazing how many single car accidents claim lives amongst antiquities traffickers. They never quite figured out what caused the accident, but they did discover in his car 50 million lira and a whole host of Polaroid photographs. And this led to a raid on his apartment in September 1st of 1995, where they found even more documents and photos. By September 13th, 1995, they were raiding the offices, warehouses of Giacomo Medici, whose name featured quite prominently in these documents they confiscated from Pascal Camera. And in 1997, he was arrested. There's his mugshot. And in 2004, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and 10 million euro fine. He served a couple of years, and he's out. He's out and about, living his life. And I think what's important about this is the fact that I think this was really the first time that this kind of activity was literally mapped out for people. And so for law enforcement, this was great. They had a trail to follow. They had a network they had uncovered. And I think for museums and collectors, this was also a huge wake-up call. I think it's naive to think that no one thought this was happening or no one knew this was happening, but this was pretty persuasive evidence of what was going on. So this, coupled with that scandal at the Sotheby's auction house, really opened up, or should have opened up, people's eyes to what exactly was going on in the antiquities business. And then Ruth mentioned the Melanipe publication history. So we had these Polaroids from the Italians. They confirmed this was from the Medici archive, and that's great. You never want to see the word Medici in an object's provenance, but we still wanted more. At the end of the day, these are just 2 photographs. And so I decided I was going to email Jacques Chenet in Geneva just to see what happened. And so I
just remembered, didn't this coincide with him, like, unrelatedly mailing me a...
Yes. So I realized Jacques Chenet was still alive and active because he sent Ruth a copy of his freshly published catalog of the Skivlunov collection, which proudly featured the Melanipe crater.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And so I emailed Jacques and I said, oh my gosh, we just got the book you sent us. Thank you so much. I noticed one of our objects is in here. Do you have any more information on it? He answered me. I couldn't believe it. And this was during COVID too. So I remember distinctly, I was like sitting on my bed, and I got the email. And he was like, oh my gosh, it's so nice to hear from you. Thank you for answering me. And that's actually when I got Jacques Chenet to admit over email that Pierre Skiflunov had actually purchased the Melanipe crater from a man named Christian Boussard in the mid-1980s. Now, Christian Boussard is the business partner of Giacomo Medici, and together they ran Gallery Hydra. And the fact that Skiflunov bought it from Gallery Hydra in the mid-1980s, that's what Ruth was saying about that publication history, right? It's extensively published after 1986, because that's when Skiflunov first purchased it. And so what was important about this, not only could I not believe that Jacques Chenet answered my email, was we had a direct contradiction to what we had been told about the object at the time of purchase. So again, the Medici Polaroids are important. It certainly raises the red flags for us, but now we have evidence that it had been purchased in the 80s and not purchased in the means that we were told by Christophe Leon when we purchased it. And so for us, that was enough evidence for its title to be transferred back to the Italians. So I still can't believe we answered my email.
And I think it's just, it is just worth reiterating, I think, again, this point that an association with someone like Medici, a known trafficker, does not automatically mean that the specific object in question was also looted. It certainly encourages you to pursue that question, but I think it requires really thorough research into truly establishing what the facts about object are. But you can't count out objects.
Exactly.
But you also can't kind of count it in, I guess.
Because I mean, these guys,
based on the photo.
they were dealers, you know, and so they did have a lot of material going through their hands. And I think this is actually also a really great example of, you know, we were presented with these Polaroids, but then we went further in our research and was able to uncover more information. And our experience working with both the Italians and the Greeks is they're more than happy to have us do this extra work. They're more than happy to discuss the evidence with us. So it's not even that if we just get a repatriation request, we're going to start packing the object up. You know, this is really an opportunity for us to examine the object, examine the evidence, and have this dialogue over whether or not it is appropriate that the object be repatriated. I love this. I know, I love the fish plate. Although there's one downstairs that has eyebrows painted on the fish.
It is the better fish plate.
And it's from the eyebrow painter, and I think I would fight anyone if they came for that one.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's the one that stays.
that's the one that stays. Make sure of that. So our fish plate, we actually received as a gift from a private collector in 1986. The private collector had purchased it from Sotheby's London in 1983. And now, of course, when the purchase was made in the early 80s, when it came to us in the mid 80s, I think a lot of us still believed in this almost sterling reputation of auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's. Like, oh, they're successful auction houses. They're well known. You know, we should trust things that we purchase from them.
Yeah, they're bona fide. They're a mark of quality research.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so this one I was like not surprised when they asked for it. But again, if you ask me, oh, which of our objects is looted, this isn't one I would have gone to first. But the Italians presented us with a pretty robust set of documents about the fish plate. So this fish plate was actually trafficked by a gentleman at the name of Gianfranco Becchina. He now makes olive oil. You can buy it on Amazon. I have a bottle. My boss bought it for me. And so what's really interesting about this is what we were sent by the Ministry of Culture is that black and white photo is a whole page out of a 3-ring binder of all the photographs of these objects that were consigned to Sotheby's London. And this is the consignee list right here. And you can see Sotheby's address up here. Per request of the Italian officials, I have blocked out who consigned it right here. But safe to say, it was actually consigned to Sotheby's by Becchina using an alias that he commonly used. It is not a crime to consign objects to an auction house. He consigned a lot of objects in this particular sale. But if you are consigning an object in good faith, why are you using an alias? Why are you not using your own name? And of course, we have to consider, now that we know it was Becchina, the one who consigned it, what exactly is the deal with Becchina? What does his history look like? And he is a Sicilian dealer and convicted antiquities trafficker, may or may not be protected by the mob. This is being recorded, so I'm going to leave it up for question if the mob is involved with this. But Bechina operated a gallery in Basel, Switzerland called Palladian Antique Kunst with his wife Ursula. But he essentially used the same web and the same methodology as Medici, and there's a huge amount of crossover from the Tomaroli to the middlemen to the auction houses that were used to launder these objects, a huge amount of crossover. Bechina has been dealing since the 1970s, and he had a Polaroid show up in Cameron's car. It wasn't all Medici stuff, there was some of Bechina's stuff as well. And sort of once they had arrested Medici, the Italian officials then really started to go after Bechina. And Bechina could tell the heat was on him. And so he actually returned to his hometown in Sicily, Castelvetrano, in 2002 and left Ursula behind to run the gallery, which that's gotta be an awkward conversation between them. And by May 2002, the Carabinieri and Swiss police had raided his properties in Basel. And amongst the things they seized, it was over 6,000 objects, but they also seized 8,000 photographs and 13,000 documents. And this is what's known as the Bechina archive. And so with Medici, when they raided his premises and confiscated this material, yes, there were objects, a lot of Polaroids, a lot of photographs. Now the photographs have notes on them, which can be quite helpful, but it is mostly photographs. The Bechina archive is extremely robust. There are photographs, there are notes on the back of the photographs, there are documents, there's receipts detailing who he had dinner with, what they ordered, and how much they paid for it. I mean, it's an insane amount of documentation. And so the thing with the Bechina archive is there is more than just the photo, right? This is our little band cup. And, you know, if you turned it over, there's notes as to who trafficked it, who dug it up, who was it offered to, who helped him ship it. So it's an extremely robust database, or archive. So in this sense, the archive was enough. The archive and the fact that he had consigned it using an alias was enough for us to return those objects.
And we'll just add with the fish plates, this was one that the photo that we received was tiny.
Yes.
So sort of thinking about, you know, complexities, but just sort of very basic challenges. It took us a minute to actually decide that it was the same object.
There's this little round dot up here. We spent so long staring at that dot. Is that part of the plate? Is that not part of the plate? Ours says half the dot.
Where does it come from?
What does that
What
mean?
is it?
And so we finally got them to send us bigger pictures. And it's a green sticker.
Yeah, color
photographs. But this is what we do with ourselves.
Yes.
You know, like these.
I
Like
want to know how many hours we spent
it's
wondering.
sad. It's
about
sad.
this.
It's very sad. You know, or like this. I don't even know what is this. I don't even know what this is. Clamshell. It's like, okay, so it has this many dots on it. How many dots are in the one in the photograph? Like it's intense. It's intense. But it was worth it. It was worth it. There he is. There's Bechina. Okay.
Trustworthy.
Very trustworthy. Yes. And this one, it's done by the Wild Goat? It's Wild Goat style.
This is the style of decoration.
It's very distinctive. So this fragment was actually a relatively more recent purchase. We purchased it from Sotheby's, New York in 2005. And we were told at the time of purchase that it came from an ex-private collection in New York from 1976. This one, yeah, again, hindsight's 2020. We probably should have asked more questions. But we didn't. And so here it lived for almost 20 years. And this was actually really interesting, the evidence that we were presented with from the Carabinieri. You know, from my perspective, X private collection in New York from 1976. That doesn't tell me anything. There's a lot of people in New York. And so this was one that, it's like we just didn't have really provenance information.
And it's maybe just worth that provenance statement, X private collection location, is as a standard. It's a convention in auction sales. That is sort of how that's how provenance is described. So unless you are when you consign an object for sale, unless you want your name attached to that sale, your right as a consigner is to anonymity. And so it is the convention just to be like, in private collection, give the place and give a date that is stated as when that object was acquired. And it's the sort of thing that is so commonplace that you don't really question it.
Right.
But it can hide any number of problems.
Yeah, it's hard because it is well within someone's right to remain anonymous. We're in the process of ending our private long-term loan program, but when we had private lenders, it is well within their right to remain anonymous on the labels. It doesn't mean anything is wrong.
Yeah. Right.
But it can be used to cover a multitude of sins. So it's hard. And the auction houses are under no obligation to release personal information or names to you as the object's purchaser. So I tried actually contacting Sotheby's, and I'm like,
they just
this private collection. They don't talk to us. They have a filter, and my emails just go somewhere else. But they're under no obligation. I've had people offer, we can write a letter to the consignor and ask if we can release information, or ask if they would like to get in touch with you, but
so even as an institution, we have no right to know if we purchase an object at auction. We don't get to know who consigned it. We, as Annie says, we can write a letter that the auction house will pass on to the consignor, and they may choose to agree to let us know who they are, but they don't have to.
And so in the case of our plate fragment, I still don't know who consigned it to Sotheby's. I have suspicions, but I don't know. I don't know who consigned it to Sotheby's. But this one was interesting, and we wanted to talk to you guys about it because it's different. It's not Medici, it's not Bacchina, it's not one of the big archives that cracked this open for us. We were sent this photograph by the Ministry of Culture, and that's our piece on the left. And then there's these two other pieces that join perfectly. One came from official excavations at
Francavilla Maritima.
There you go. And one came from a European museum. And the European museum had just recently repatriated the fragment to the Italians because they were presented with evidence that it had been illegally excavated.
So quite simply, when you're presented with an object that has been found under controlled excavation that matches with an object in your collection, there's only one way that the object in your collection has arrived there, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of there was no question about what it had to do with this object.
And I think one of the things that this is a part of a plate fragment. We're not talking about the Parthenon marbles here, but I think it's nice to be able to reunite the pieces of an object. So I think even if we had questions about whether or not this was trafficked, and we don't, I think just the fact that we were able to reunite the pieces, and so I think that was important.
And to go back to sort of what I was saying earlier, now we have an East Greek pottery fragment that we know came out of the ground in Italy. And so that gives us an immediately different way of understanding this object, even though it remains in a fragmented form. So that kind of felt, I think of all of these, it felt very satisfying.
Yeah, it was very satisfying. And so this is one, the fish plate and the plate fragment are the ones that both physically returned to Italy.
Yeah.
And they're home. And then Melanipe, the Laconian cup, and the Vanna cup remained here on long-term loan from the Italians.
And that was based on, we had really productive conversations with the Italian ministry, and those were the objects that we asked them to consider loaning to us, and we were very happy that they agreed. Whereas, as we said, the fragment, there was no question that we wanted it to stay. We absolutely wanted it to go home.
Yeah.
And the fish plate was an object that we, in thinking about the collection, we have other examples. So it sort of felt unreasonable to ask to keep it when it could go back to Italy.
And so one of the things that was challenging about this is over the course of the conversations back and forth between us and the Italians, we went through 3 directors.
Yes.
Bonnie retired, Donna was the interim director, and then Henry was hired. And that was very challenging, and I have no doubt that slowed down the process. This whole thing took about 2.5 years. But we had an extraordinary amount of staff turnover in that time, and a change of priorities and approaches as well with those different directors. And so I don't think if we get contacted by the Italians again, we'll go about this the same way. But the important thing is that we got it done. And after we had already signed the agreement in August, we actually traveled to Rome to meet with the Italian Ministry of Culture and also to meet with the Carabinieri. Again, these are not art objects. Those are Monte Carlos objects. I just wanted you to see their uniforms because the Carabinieri have the best uniforms. And so I think what we are trying to do is create these, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, is to create these meaningful, long-lasting relationships with the ministries of culture, with the Carabinieri, so that we can approach objects in our collection, approach questions that they have in a collegial manner and a non-adversarial manner.
Absolutely. And to share information and to really do this jointly.
I do have to admit, though, when we met the Carabinieri officer, I didn't realize he was the Carabinieri officer. So when I talk about Bikina being raided, he's the one who did it. I was totally fangirling. I get so excited. I was like, oh my God, you did that? But he's also just a lovely human being. But when we met with the Ministry of Culture and the Carabinieri, I think one of the things that became very evident, if it wasn't already, was that they are interested in evidence-based returns. We actually went to the meeting with a couple of extra objects to ask them about, and 2 of the objects, they said to us, we have no claim on these objects. We have no way that we can say these need to be repatriated. And I think that was just such an important moment because it was showing us that, oh, they are doing this based on evidence and logic. And I think there's still a fear amongst museums in America that once you open this door, they're just going to show up with a U-Haul and clean out your galleries. And, one of the women from the Ministry of Culture said to us, we have no interest in taking all of the objects out of American museums. And they are so excited to collaborate with us and to loan objects to us, but also to work on these provenance problems together. And so, we spent 2 days with them just talking over, okay, this guy was trafficking from Bikina, this guy was trafficking from Medici, what is the connection here? Oh my gosh, did you see this piece of it? It was just such a rewarding experience to feel like we have partners in this.
Because I think so often it can feel like we're working in the dark.
Exactly.
A lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And so the more that you can talk, both with the ministry, but I think also with our peer institutions to kind of understand what their experiences have been, the more that you can kind of build a data set of who are the individuals that these objects are passing through, what kinds of objects, when and where, then you're building your arsenal to really kind of tackle this issue. And so, it's been so rewarding that we've got this good relationship that we can now really lean on and work together.
Exactly. And, last week when the Greek Minister of Culture and her entourage were here, we got to spend some time with my counterpart, and we were talking about the Larnax. We were talking about the bathtub that we returned. And yes, we've returned it. It's home in Greece now. but we're still working on it. We're still trying to figure out, how did this bathtub and others like it leave Greece? What do these networks look like? And so to me, that's really rewarding, that it's not just this is repatriated and it's done.
Right.
Let's increase our knowledge. Let's help us figure this out, and how we can tackle this problem. Yeah. Plus it's Italy, they have great food. It's really exciting. And the Pythos. So I put the Pythos up here because I just wanted to stress once again that, and Ruth already brought up this issue, that one potential red flag name in a provenance should not damn an object. Our objects are innocent until proven guilty. If an object ever can be guilty, it's not the object's fault. But we are aware, of course, of what goes on the internet. We are, of course, aware of what gets written about us in our collection in articles. But suspicions are not enough. One photograph, one name, that's not enough. It's not enough for us, and it's not enough for the source countries. We've experienced this working with the Greeks and the Italians. They're working off of the evidence. They know what evidence they have. They know what to do with that evidence. And so, I think it's still really important that we do as much research here as we can on our objects, because again, it's not just all about finding the stolen art, right? We're filling out the life history of these objects. And so it's always good to have that foundation. It's always good to spend time in the library. But you eventually reach that point where if you have lingering questions, you have lingering doubts, we're in a really great position right now where we can reach out to the Italian Ministry of Culture. We can reach out to the Greek Ministry of Culture, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. We can reach out to these people and just say, hey, we have this object and we're stuck.
Yeah.
What do you guys know about it? But they are not willing to initiate repatriations based on suspicions and rumors, and nor are we. And so I just cannot stress enough that everyone here is working together off of the evidence that is available to us. The Pythos was one of the objects that was under consideration with the Greeks. We met with the Greeks in April of 2022. 23? What is time? I can't anymore. 23.
Last year.
It was 23. Yeah, it was last year. There had been a claim made against the Pythos where the Greek government requested it be repatriated. And in our conversations with the Greeks, we all acknowledge there's no evidence that it was actually excavated from Greece. And if we can't prove country of origin, where are we supposed to send it back to? So we both agreed to basically put a pin in this one for now. The Greeks have set aside the claim. We'll keep working on it. You never know what evidence will become available in the future.
And I think that's kind of the point of all of this, that actually our knowledge of the collective histories of these objects changes.
Yeah.
And so it may be that evidence appears that will prompt us to reconsider this object in the same way that evidence reappeared that prompted us to reconsider the Melanie Pay crater and the fish plate. We're not saying it will not be returned to Greece. But for now, it's...
Or someone else.
Or somewhere else.
Right, yeah. And this is also why I say provenance research is never done.
Yeah.
Right? Even this object or an object that I feel reasonably comfortable about, you never know. There's always more evidence. There's always more of a story to be told.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Which leads us to the stories that we tell in our galleries.
And I'm really sorry for these pictures, but I kept getting my shadow on them. So they're...
I've tried photographing this.
Yeah, it's hard.
So one thing that Annie and I felt was very important was to ensure that these stories were visible and present in the galleries. We didn't want this to be a secret that we returned these objects. Nor do we want there to be any sort of shame attached to the fact that these objects had to have been returned. And we also kind of wanted to bring provenance into people's kind of general knowledge and people's experience of what it is to look at an object in a museum. Because, as I hope we've demonstrated, these histories are as integral to these objects as their original histories in their original contexts. So we do have now in the galleries this sign, which maybe you have noticed. It's at the entrance to the Greek and Roman galleries, with this QR code that will link you to the pages that Annie and I put together on our website that kind of give a sort of précis of what we've talked about tonight for each of these objects. And then each of the 3 that have remained with us on loan, are marked in their individual cases as having been repatriated. So this is sort of one way that we're thinking about how to be open and transparent about these processes, and to kind of have our visitors think about how do these objects get to be in these museums, sort of how have they come here, and sort of to acknowledge that sort of the ways in which objects have been valued, desired, collected, looted, stolen, displayed, is all part of their story. We also have an amazing blog that Annie has been writing. We have this lecture series that we're sort of in the process of creating.
Yeah.
But for me, really, it sort of comes back to that idea of what does it mean to care for an object, which at its core is what a museum is for. And we spoke about this at the event on Monday with the Greek ministry last week, that to care for an object, of course, means it's physical care, but it also means it's kind of intellectual care. It means understanding what that object is, where it came from, how it came to be here. And I think that also extends to care for the peoples and cultures that these objects represent. And sometimes that means returning an object. Sometimes that means continuing to steward it here. Sometimes that means sharing that ownership or that knowledge with the countries of origin. And so that's something that I think we are really kind of excited to continue emphasizing in our work here.
Yeah, and now that the Greek objects have gone back, we have now cleared all outstanding claims against any of our objects, not against, and so we've taken care of past business. There will be more conversations like this going forward, but I think now we can take a little bit of a breath. And something I would like to do when we find the time is put more provenance stories in the galleries. So it's not just always about repatriation. This is extremely important. It's important that we share this, and it's important that we talk about it. But I'm really cautious. I don't want us to just equate provenance with returning stolen art. Right. And so hopefully this semester, certainly this year, look for more stories to be told in the galleries, more exploration of how these objects came to be collected, and find their way into the Carlos. So that's something I hope we can find the time to do.
We will get there. And also, we're working on all of our objects, not just those that have or have had claims raised, but we want to understand all of our objects in as kind of full and complete a way as we can. So it's a lot of work. There are 7,000 objects in the Greek and Roman collection alone.
There were 35,000 objects in the collection. So I'm busy.
Very busy.
And I love when people are like, why does it take so long? I am one person. I get tired.
And she does amazing work.
Thank you. With your help. Yeah. So thank you guys. And do you have any questions? Yes.
Many questions. I think I saw this hand first.
You've spoken about the Greek and Roman or Italian issues. We have a wonderful collection of Mesoamerican pieces that also have interesting provenance, and pieces from Assyria and from Acadia. Are you are you individually, so tired and busy, in charge of all of those provenance issues as well?
Yes. I am. So the question was about the other collecting areas. So Central and South America, ancient Near East. Yeah, I get to do all of it. And I think what's hard is because it's just me, and so for Mediterranean, it's me and Ruth, right? That's it. We've had to make hard decisions about what is a priority. And with these claims that we've had, of course those have to take priority, because those are that we have to get these done in a timely manner. We want to get everything done in a timely manner, but we have to tackle those things first. What's also challenging about Central and South American objects is we have not had a curator in that area. For those of you who don't know, my degree is in Egyptology, so I am very comfortable in the Mediterranean world. Of course, I have to rely on my curators for the subject knowledge, but I have a greater comfort level with that material. When it comes to Central and South America and Africa, I quite simply don't have the subject knowledge to really take these objects and run with them on my own. And those are the two areas where we don't have curators currently. And so, unfortunately, those they have to wait their turn. So we really need, I need to get curators in before I can really properly evaluate those objects. Now, of course, if we were to get a claim or a repatriation request in the meantime, we would work on it. We would solve that issue. But for right now, unfortunately, they've just kind of had to wait. Yeah.
Did a claim come through basically because they were looking at the Carlos website and spotted objects they were interested in?
Yes.
Well, that shows the value of putting everything you have on the web.
And I would also like to point out, I am the one who puts everything online. And so that is always very funny to me when people are like, do you know you have these objects in your collection? I'm like, yeah, I put them online. I did.
It's also, we made the decision to put the provenances that we knew for our objects online, because we wanted to put that out there for transparency, but also in case people were looking and they could say, oh, hang on a minute, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And so that, that sort of, yes, it's proved painfully ironic when people come to us to say, oh, well, you have objects from such and such a dealer. And we would say, yes, we know, and we want you to know, because we want to be transparent about this, and we want to learn more. Yeah. So that was absolutely a kind of deliberate decision to put all of that information online.
And I put, in terms of the provenance, what we know today. Mm-hmm. If I'm not sure, that's when you'll see said to be, or possibly, to qualify that this information hasn't been verified yet. But my feeling, and we've talked about this, is I want to get, this is what we think. Mm-hmm. And if people know different or have other evidence, then that's great. That's very helpful to us. And then also it's been helpful with people researching similar dealers, similar paths that their objects have taken at other institutions. They can be like, oh, I see you also have material from this person. Yeah. And then we can help collaborate.
Pieces. I would like to observe, I think those objects on the fish plate were lemon slices.
Can I tell you?
Just revolutionized South Italian vase paintings.
So can I tell you that's why I asked Ruth what they are, because I call them lemon slices. Because you have the fish and you want to squeeze lemon over it.
Sure.
You guys are picking far away.
Get your steps in, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. My question is very practical. What are the objects that Italy and perhaps Greece have no interest in having repatriated? What can we, as Pat just said, what can we count on?
Oh, aren't you cute? No, it's a good question. What's hard is we can't give you absolutes. When we went and spoke with the Greek officials, they said, we've looked at your website. There's nothing that's jumping out at us at this time. The objects that we've been speaking to Italy with, one will be going back, because they have evidence. There's another one they don't have evidence about. But that's like as it stood on that day in December. Yeah, so I think it's Katie I always joke with, like, there are no other objects that are going back as of Wednesday, January 31st at 8:31 p.m.
Whenever we're trying to develop educational content around a specific picture, like this one's going to be here for a few months, right? And it's that as of.
Yeah. There are definitely, like Aphrodite down in the class.
Right, there are objects with great provenance, by which we mean centuries of documented provenance that are currently not going to go anywhere unless things
like that. I would be surprised.
Yes. But yeah, we can't say that. We don't know. And it's a fact of when our collection was built. That these are objects that were being purchased in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. The possibility for us discovering problems with their provenance is greater because of that. And that's not unique to our museum. That is true of museums that were acquiring objects in that time period, wherever those museums are.
So it's a good question, but one that's actually very difficult to answer.
Thank you for all this information. How does this mind shift in the last whatever decade or so inform your acquisitions and as you're receiving it?
Yeah, possibly so. So we follow the UNESCO 1970 convention is our sort of standard. So that's, again, most museums everywhere, but certainly in the United States, have a requirement of documented provenance that goes back to at least 1970. So we need to have known that an object left its country of origin before then. So that's the kind of starting point when we consider any acquisition. We have now a very robust acquisitions policy that requires really extensive research into the provenance of an object. So not only is Annie researching things that already exist in our collection, but she's researching any potential future acquisition so that we can be confident that we have that kind of documented history for that object. But it absolutely means that there is a smaller pool of objects that we can consider for purchase. And that just simply is the fact. So if I were to be looking to acquire something and I'm going to a Christie's catalogue or a Sotheby's catalogue, that has 100 objects in it, quite often there's maybe 10 that we could consider. And that's before we've actually even really got into digging into whether what they're saying is the provenance is true. So it's hard, and we are applying the same requirements to any gifts, as well as to any loans that might come to us from private collections, which we're really kind of restricting that as well. So we're really kind of enforcing some pretty stringent requirements on objects that we add to our collection.
And it's hard because, we have people who we've had relationships with for a long time who either want to donate an object or convert a loan to a gift. And, unfortunately anymore, we can't accept a letter stating it's been in my family's collection for the last 60 years as proof.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult because it's not that we are calling these specific people liars or, that they're being deceitful. But just to really be responsible, to make responsible decisions and set up future generations of Carlos employees for success, we have to be, almost overly cautious. And so it has been tough to have these conversations where, yes, 5 years ago we may have accepted this, but today in 2024 we can't accept this. So it's sometimes awkward. But it's important that we do this, and I think it'll be better in the long run for us.
I'm curious, not why they wanted to repatriate what they wanted to repatriate,
But of the things that they let you keep, why did they want the fish plate to go home?
It was part of the negotiations.
Yeah.
Was like, we knew with Italy we could ask for things to remain on long-term loan. Greece doesn't really operate like that. We physically returned everything, and then we will be receiving loans in the future. And so when we had to ask the Italians for what we wanted to keep, it was a little bit of that, like, okay, what do we got? What do we want? And, the plate fragment, quite honestly, was in storage.
Yeah.
It had never been on display. It was used for teaching, but it wasn't a centerpiece to our collection. Whereas Melanipe was much more important. We do have the other fish plate. And so we had to examine our own holdings, our own priorities. What does education use? What do our teachers use? And really make sure we were making good asks for the loans.
We sort of didn't want to be so brazen as to say, let us have everything.
Right.
And so, absolutely, sort of, it comes down to a kind of curatorial and executional decision. Melanipe is a phenomenal object. And so our sort of hope was, if we could have anything remain on loan, that it would at least be that object. And so actually the fact that they allowed the other two pieces to stay was a bonus.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned.
I know.
I was not expecting it.
I wasn't expecting that either.
And so, this comes back to this idea of kind of collections care. We have a fish plate. Do we need two? No. You don't need two to teach. You need two if you're being greedy. And that kind of is what it comes down to, right? So we were very happy for that to return.
Yeah.
Just want to hear Kate. This is in line with your question, how you stated about it's dealing with a family or something. What kind of proof do you need if it's been in the family for 100 years?
What I love is photographs. So not Polaroids, no Polaroids.
No Polaroids.
No Polaroids.
In the back of a car.
So we have so the question was, okay, if this has been in your family for like 100 years, what kind of evidence would I be looking for? So we have, in 2018, we got the Ricard collection. It's over 1,500 objects from a family. And there were 2 Palmyra reliefs in the collection. There is no purchase documentation on the Palmyra reliefs. But they did have photographs of the Palmyra reliefs from when the Monaco Museum opened up in the 70s. It's still not great, but we know they were not taken out during the Syrian civil war. And so what I'm looking for is, are there snapshots of your family standing in front of a fireplace, and there's the object on the fireplace? Is that a photograph that I can document? Are there correspondence related to the object? Are there invoices?
Is there a sticker?
Is there a sticker on the object?
Specifically is of my grandmother's boot. Okay, my grandmother immigrated from Burma. She was born here, but this was when it was under British rule. And when she came here in 1918, this piece came, and I have it now. And I'm practically looking at my childhood. I remember it on her wall, so it's pictured.
And I, like, off the top of my head, okay, so it was, her grandmother immigrated from Burma in 1918. And that was when Burma was under British rule. And so, yeah, photographs would be really helpful, because I don't know what Burma's cultural heritage laws look like. That's also something we have to consider, is the 1970 exception, or the 1970 UNESCO Convention is a basic starting point, but ultimately we have to go back to the cultural patrimony laws of the country where this came out of. So what I like for Burma, what I would have to do is go back and research, what did the cultural patrimony laws look like under British rule in 1918? And then what do their cultural patrimony laws look like today? And so that would inform how far back in time I would have to go to verify the provenance of the object.
I think we have time for one more question.
Make it a good one.
Yeah.
This will be very quick to make it because it's not actually a question, it's just a comment, but my mind is still struggling to get my mind around the idea that the irony of I keep interpearling Italian art being a Medici.
Yes.
It is perfect.
Yeah, it is perfect. Yeah.
Amy and Ruth, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. You guys are funny.